When a billionaire let his son choose a new mother, no one expected him to pick the maid. The story begins in a sprawling, luxurious mansion. Billionaire Richard Sterling, widowed for 2 years, is worried about his 7-year-old son, Ethan, who has been lonely and withdrawn. Richard's friends suggest he remarry to give Ethan a proper mother. Richard, pragmatic and ruthless in business, decides to let Ethan make the choice. He invites 5 wealthy, elegant women from elite society to meet Ethan. They are all impeccably dressed, polite, and clearly vying for his attention with gifts and flattery, but Ethan barely reacts. His eyes wander to Leela, the young, kind-hearted black maid who has been caring for him since his mother's death. She is humble, patient, and treats him with genuine warmth. By the end of the chapter, Richard sets up the competition, unaware that Ethan's heart is already leaning somewhere unexpected. Richard had always believed that wealth, sophistication, and status could be a measure of worth, and he intended to prove it. When he decided that Ethan needed a new mother figure, he devised a series of challenges to identify which woman among the 5 candidates could meet the lofty standards he envisioned. The events were carefully curated to test social grace, intelligence, elegance, and the ability to manage a household at the highest societal level. He began with an invitation to an exclusive gala, a gathering of influential friends, philanthropists, and business associates. The women arrived in designer gowns, each more exquisite than the last, and they carried themselves with poise and confidence. Richard watched closely as they navigated the room, engaging in conversation with his peers, exchanging pleasantries, and demonstrating impeccable manners. Every laugh was measured, every compliment carefully delivered. Leela, in contrast, arrived quietly, dressed simply but elegantly, her presence understated. She did not try to draw attention to herself, did not force laughter or impress with wealth. Instead, she greeted Richard politely but spent most of her time on the edges of the crowd, observing and listening. She noticed small things, a child's frown, a nervous waiter, a guest whose jacket was too tight, and offered small gestures of kindness without any expectation of reward. As the evening progressed, Richard saw that the other women excelled at conversation, at flattery, and at capturing attention, and he nodded with satisfaction, convinced that the tests would reveal a worthy successor to Ethan's late mother. Meanwhile, Ethan, still adjusting to the absence of his mother, gravitated toward Leela. While the other women discussed investments and fashion trends, Leela sat beside him quietly, listening when he spoke about school, about missing his mother, and about the small things that troubled him, like losing his favorite pencil or struggling with a difficult homework problem. She never dismissed his concerns or tried to redirect the conversation to appear charming in front of others. Her genuine attention made Ethan feel understood for the first time in months, and he began to watch her with interest, noticing that she did not compete, did not boast, and did not attempt to impress anyone except through her quiet actions. Richard's next challenge was a charity event. The women were tasked with planning a small fundraiser for a local children's hospital, demonstrating their organizational skills, empathy, and ability to network with donors. They each presented elaborate proposals, detailing budgets, themes, and potential media coverage. Richard applauded their ingenuity, sophistication, and polish, yet Leela, though she presented nothing extravagant, focused on the children themselves. She visited the hospital beforehand, spoke to the staff, and listened to the patients' stories. She suggested small, meaningful gestures that could bring joy, a handmade activity corner, a library of donated books, and simple gifts that would be memorable to each child. Her approach lacked flash, but it carried heart. During the event, while the other women engaged in formal introductions and posed for photographs, Leela moved quietly among the children, making sure each one felt seen and cared for. Ethan noticed the way she held the hand of a frightened child, the way she knelt to speak at eye level with another, and the way she encouraged laughter with gentle humor. He realized that the other women were impressive on the surface, but their attentions were fleeting, designed to dazzle, whereas Leela's care was lasting and genuine. Richard, still evaluating, continued with a series of etiquette tests. He instructed the women on table settings, proper conversation with guests, and responses to awkward social situations. Each woman executed these challenges flawlessly, their grace under pressure earning polite nods from Richard and his friends. Leela participated too, but with a different focus. She helped Ethan adjust his napkin, patiently guided him through unfamiliar table manners, and whispered encouragement when he stumbled. Her success was not in winning Richard's approval or impressing the guests, but in creating an environment where Ethan could feel comfortable, confident, and valued. The differences between the women became more apparent with each test. The 5 rich candidates remained highly polished, always attentive to appearances, eager to earn praise, and ready to highlight their own accomplishments. Leela, in contrast, shone in ways that were invisible to most. She noticed the small tears in Ethan's eyes when he remembered a joke his mother used to tell. She remembered his favorite chocolate, and she helped him practice piano in a way that made learning enjoyable rather than stressful. Richard began to feel a growing sense of unease. The other women, while impressive, seemed distant from Ethan, incapable of connecting with him on a personal level. Leela's presence, though subtle, seemed to radiate warmth, understanding, and attentiveness that no amount of money or sophistication could replicate. The final test came unexpectedly. Ethan faced a personal challenge that no adult could easily notice. He had misplaced a gift he had made for his late mother and felt a pang of guilt and sadness that he could not share with anyone else. The 5 women busied themselves with last-minute presentations, social chatter, and ensuring they appeared perfect in every detail. Leela, sensing Ethan's distress, knelt beside him, listened as he explained what had happened, and offered calm, gentle guidance. She suggested ways to recreate the gift, helped him organize his thoughts, and encouraged him to honor his mother's memory in a new way. Ethan felt a warmth he had not felt since his mother's passing, a combination of understanding, patience, and true care. In that moment, surrounded by opulence and outward perfection, he realized that wealth and sophistication could never replace empathy, compassion, and the ability to be present for someone in need. When Richard finally looked at Ethan to ask for his opinion, he expected the child to be dazzled by the grand gestures and social charm of the other women. Instead, Ethan's eyes sought Leela, and he quietly asked if she could help him with his problem. The other women looked puzzled, unsure why a child would favor someone who had not competed for attention or accolades. Richard, for the first time, felt a flicker of doubt. Perhaps the test had been misunderstood. Perhaps worth was not measured in appearances or accomplishments, but in the ability to care, to notice, and to nurture. Leela smiled gently at Ethan, agreed to help, and together they found a solution that honored his mother's memory and soothed his heart. Richard observed silently, a mixture of pride and bewilderment stirring within him. He had designed tests to determine the best candidate, yet it was the one who had tried the least to impress him who had passed them all in the only way that truly mattered, by earning the trust, affection, and respect of the child whose life she had touched. That evening, as the 5 women left, still confident in their performance, Richard lingered on the image of Leela and Ethan together. The child was laughing softly, holding his recreated gift, and she was watching him with an unassuming joy. Richard realized that, while wealth, elegance, and social skill were impressive, the final decision ceremony was meant to be the culmination of Richard's carefully orchestrated plan, a grand event to announce which of the 5 accomplished, sophisticated women would earn the honor of becoming Ethan's new mother. The ballroom gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the tables adorned with immaculate floral arrangements, and the air buzzing with polite conversation, muted laughter, and the occasional clinking of champagne glasses. Richard had rehearsed every detail in his mind, the way the women would present themselves, the poised smiles, the flawless etiquette, the measured responses to every question. He was confident that one of his chosen candidates would shine, that the room would erupt in polite applause, and that he would have the satisfaction of seeing his vision realized. But nothing in his planning had prepared him for the moment that would soon unfold. Ethan sat on a small chair at the center of the room, a child who had endured months of quiet sadness since the loss of his mother, now holding his hands together nervously in his lap. The women circled him with polished smiles, each waiting for Richard's cue, each expecting the inevitable acknowledgement of their perfection. Leela stood slightly apart, her presence understated, as always. She had not sought attention, had not attempted to impress anyone, and she had tried hard to blend into the background, unsure whether she belonged in a world so dazzlingly different from her own. Richard cleared his throat, preparing to give the ceremonial introduction, his chest tight with anticipation and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room, "today we witness a choice that will shape the life of my son and determine who will guide him with wisdom, care, and love." The women nodded, their smiles poised, their eyes glimmering with expectation. Richard turned to Ethan, expecting the boy to hesitate, to glance at the elegantly dressed candidates, perhaps to be swayed by appearances and wealth. Instead, Ethan's gaze found Leela, steady and unwavering. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The chatter in the room faded, the clinking of glasses ceased, and every eye slowly turned toward the small, determined boy. Richard's pulse quickened. "Ethan," he said cautiously, forcing calm into his voice, "you may now make your decision." Ethan's small hand lifted, pointing directly at Leela. His voice, clear and resolute, carried across the room. "I want her to be my mother." The words struck Richard like a physical blow. His mind scrambled to process what had just occurred. The room froze in silence. The 5 women, impeccably dressed and socially accomplished, froze as well, their polite smiles faltering into expressions of disbelief and offense. A low murmur ran through the crowd, punctuated by whispered gasps and disapproving murmurs. Behind delicate fans, the women exchanged glances of indignation. Their carefully curated elegance, their painstakingly rehearsed charm, their wealth and social influence, it all seemed insignificant in the face of Ethan's simple, unwavering choice. Leela's cheeks flushed a deep shade of pink. She had not anticipated this. Her heart raced, and she took an involuntary step back, unsure how to respond to such a declaration, suddenly aware of every eye in the room upon her. She stammered softly, I don't know what to say." Richard, on the other hand, felt a storm of conflicting emotions surge within him. Anger burned first, sharp and fiery. How dare the boy reject the carefully selected women of social prestige? How dare he overlook wealth, connections, and accomplishment, all of which Richard had always believed defined a person's worth? Disbelief followed quickly, a cold knot in his chest. He had meticulously designed tests to measure character, and yet the boy had chosen someone completely unexpected, someone who had not competed for attention, who had not flaunted wealth or status. Concern gnawed at him as well, practical and societal in nature. What would people say? What would friends, colleagues, and neighbors think when they heard the decision? The whispers of gossip, the subtle judgments of those who believed that only money and sophistication could signify value, weighed heavily on Richard's mind. He felt the familiar pull of pride, the instinct to control the narrative, to protect his reputation and social standing. But as he watched Ethan, small and unwavering, he saw something that slowly began to disarm him. The boy's eyes were bright, filled with trust and certainty. He did not hesitate, did not falter, did not consider the social consequences of his choice. "I don't care if she's poor," Ethan continued, his voice soft but steady, carrying a weight far beyond his years. "She's kind, she makes me happy." The simplicity of the statement struck Richard with a force he had not anticipated. It was not eloquence, charm, or wealth that mattered, it was kindness. It was the way Leela had seen Ethan, had understood him, had comforted him through moments of sadness and insecurity that no social test could measure. Richard's pride bristled, resisting the notion that someone of modest means could hold such influence over his son's happiness. Yet deep down, a part of him could not deny the truth in Ethan's words. For months, Richard had observed Leela quietly, often dismissing her lack of ambition or polish as inconsequential. Now he saw the profound impact of her presence, the way she had connected with Ethan, the way she had earned his trust without ostentation, without effort, without any pretense. The rich women began to speak in hushed tones, their whispers sharp with offense. Some called the choice unthinkable, improper, even insulting. Their poised expressions masked simmering anger and wounded pride, yet Richard felt a flicker of empathy for Leela, who stood there, unsure how to respond, suddenly burdened with the attention of a room filled with judgmental eyes. He watched her swallow nervously, adjust her simple dress, and offer a small, reassuring smile to Ethan. That small gesture, quiet and unassuming, was enough to pierce the armor of Richard's skepticism. He remembered the months of observing her actions, how she had comforted Ethan when he missed his late mother, how she had encouraged him, guided him, and nurtured his little triumphs without fanfare or expectation of reward. The realization began to take root. Perhaps he had misjudged what it meant to be worthy. Perhaps the measures of wealth, sophistication, and social grace were irrelevant in the presence of genuine care and affection. The weight of societal expectation pressed on him, yet he felt a subtle shift in perspective, a begrudging acknowledgement that Ethan's choice, though unconventional, reflected something deeper and more meaningful than any test, any display of elegance, any accumulation of status could ever reveal. Richard's thoughts swirled with conflicting notions: pride and embarrassment, fear of judgment and the recognition of truth, anger at the audacity of the boy, and awe at his discernment. For a long moment, he simply stared, searching for a way to reconcile his worldview with the clarity of Ethan's heart. Leela stepped closer to Ethan, kneeling beside him, and offered her hand in a quiet gesture of solidarity and reassurance. Ethan took it without hesitation, his small fingers gripping hers, a bond formed not by appearances or accomplishments, but by trust, understanding, and genuine affection. The room seemed to exhale collectively, as if even the walls acknowledged the profound simplicity of the moment. Richard, still reeling, felt the first stirrings of humility. The boy had chosen authenticity over appearance, heart over status, and love over superficiality. It was a lesson that Richard, in all his years of careful planning, had never fully understood. Slowly, reluctantly, Richard had never imagined he would find himself observing a relationship unfold with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and reluctant admiration. Yet here he was, sitting in the grand study, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, watching Leela interact with Ethan as if she belonged in this house all along. Initially, he had permitted her presence reluctantly, expecting it to be temporary, a passing favor to appease the boy's whims, a fleeting experiment to see if a modest woman could survive in the world of opulence he had meticulously curated. Yet the more he watched, the more impossible it became to deny the profound effect she had on his son. Each evening, Leela appeared with a calm and quiet energy, entering Ethan's room without pretense, her presence unassuming but steady. Richard noted the little routines she created, how she would sit on the edge of the bed, book in hand, her voice gentle but expressive, reading stories that captured Ethan's imagination. She had a way of altering her tone, giving each character a personality, a life that drew Ethan in completely. The boy's eyes sparkled, his attention riveted not by wealth or glamour, but by someone who truly listened, who responded with curiosity, and who made him feel important, seen, and understood. Richard watched the subtle gestures that made Leela remarkable in ways money could not purchase. When Ethan struggled with a word or stumbled on a tricky passage, she did not scold or hurry him. She encouraged, guided, and celebrated even the smallest victories, and each success elicited a quiet, genuine smile from her and a laugh from the boy that was unlike anything Richard had heard in months, pure, unforced, and full of life. Homework sessions became more than academic exercises. Leela encouraged Ethan to ask questions, to explore, to think creatively rather than merely memorize. When he built a small model of a spaceship from blocks, she praised his imagination, asked about his design choices, and challenged him gently to think about improvements, fostering curiosity instead of insisting on perfection. Richard, who had always prioritized achievement, status, and measurable outcomes, felt a pang of discomfort as he watched the boy blossom under guidance that was warm, patient, and deeply personal. Leela's intelligence revealed itself in quiet ways, far subtler than the grand accomplishments Richard had valued in the other women. She organized schedules effortlessly, prepared nutritious meals, and anticipated needs without fanfare. She resolved minor crises, a missing school assignment, a torn shirt, a forgotten permission slip, with calm decisiveness that Richard could not help but admire. Yet she never flaunted her abilities, never sought praise, and never allowed her competence to overshadow Ethan's growth. She balanced responsibility with humility, creating an environment in which the boy could thrive without pressure or judgment. Richard noticed the way she handled the household with an emotional strength that matched her intelligence. She read the unspoken cues in the house, understood moods without being told, and navigated the social expectations of staff and guests with quiet diplomacy. There was no drama, no ostentation, just steady, thoughtful action, a competence so seamless that it seemed almost invisible, yet it transformed the household. Slowly, he began to realize that his initial prejudice, his belief that only wealth and social standing could signify capability, was unfounded. Leela's grace, her empathy, and her intellect were unquantifiable yet undeniable, and he could not dismiss their impact. Meanwhile, Ethan's transformation became increasingly visible. The boy who had carried a quiet sadness in his eyes, who had recoiled from conversation and laughter, now greeted each day with curiosity and joy. He asked questions about everything, from the stars in the night sky to the mechanics of a simple clock, and Leela answered with patience, encouraging exploration rather than dictating solutions. She celebrated mistakes as learning opportunities, turning small failures into moments of understanding and growth. Bedtime, once a time of quiet tears and whispered memories of a mother lost, became a time of laughter, imagination, and connection. Ethan's giggles filled the rooms, reverberating through the halls like a long-forgotten melody, and Richard, who had feared the loss of status and control, found himself listening with a strange sense of awe and disbelief. Even during the day, their bond manifested in small, meaningful ways. Ethan sought Leela's guidance for minor dilemmas, like how to apologize to a friend or how to organize his school notes. She provided counsel not as an authority figure dictating terms, but as a confidant who valued his thoughts, respected his feelings, and encouraged independence. Richard watched as Ethan learned to articulate his emotions, to express empathy, and to navigate challenges with a newfound confidence, and he could not help but feel a twinge of envy. How had a woman with no wealth or pedigree unlocked in his son a joy that his world of privilege had failed to produce? The wealthy candidates, he realized, had excelled in social poise, etiquette, and accomplishment, yet none had inspired laughter, curiosity, or creativity in the boy they all sought to impress. Leela's presence illuminated what wealth could never provide: understanding, attention, and unconditional support. Richard's evenings were increasingly spent in observation, not interference. He noticed the subtle rhythms of their days, the way Leela anticipated Ethan's needs before he spoke them aloud, the way she encouraged him to explore his talents, and the way her quiet competence allowed him to develop independence and resilience. He saw that her influence was transformative, not because she dictated outcomes, but because she fostered confidence, joy, and a sense of security. Gradually, Richard's internal conflict shifted. Once he had worried about appearances, societal judgment, and gossip, he now wrestled with admiration and humility. He began to question the standards he had always held dear, realizing that love and care, genuine engagement, and emotional intelligence could not be bought or measured by status. For the first time in his life, he acknowledged that character, kindness, and emotional connection were far more valuable than prestige, wealth, or social acclaim. The transformation in Ethan was undeniable. He laughed freely, pursued his interests with vigor, and shared stories of his day with enthusiasm and warmth. Bedtime stories were no longer a solitary act of coping, but a shared ritual of joy, imagination, and learning. Richard observed the boy's confidence growing in tandem with Leela's guidance, and he could not deny the profound effect her presence had on the household. In quiet moments, Richard caught glimpses of a side of Leela that left him in awe: her resilience, her patience, her ability to remain composed under pressure, and her unwavering kindness even in the face of subtle social snubs. He began to see her not just as someone who complemented Ethan's life, but as a force that elevated the entire household. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to allow himself to trust her judgment, to depend on her advice, and to admire her discretion and insight. Leela never sought power or acknowledgement, yet she commanded respect through the quiet strength of her actions, the depth of her care, and the authentic. Word of the unusual choice leaks to the elite society. Richard faces ridicule, gossip, and even business pressure to reconsider. The 5 wealthy women make subtle attempts to sway Ethan or embarrass Leela. Richard is forced to confront society's shallow values. He learns to defend his family, realizing that Ethan's happiness outweighs social opinion. Leela proves her integrity by remaining composed and refusing to compromise her dignity. Ethan, confident in his choice, supports Leela openly. Richard finally accepts that love cannot be dictated by wealth or social status. Richard officially welcomes Leela into the family, not just as a mother figure for Ethan, but as a respected partner in the household. The story ends on a heartwarming note: Ethan happy and thriving, Leela finally recognized for her worth and kindness. Richard humbled and changed, realizing that true wealth lies in love and loyalty, not money. The final scene shows the 3 of them walking in the garden at sunset, laughing together, a family formed not by status, but by heart and connection.